Welcome to today's episode of the Thought Leadership livestream, coming to you as always from Kuble's Live Hub. My name is Christoph Hess, and for these sessions I invite experts to talk about different perspectives on thought leadership. Our perspective for today will be B2B, and with me here in the studio is Olivia Coker-Decker from ABB Electrification, where she is their Global Thought Leadership Manager. Welcome, Olivia.
Thank you, Christoph. It's my pleasure to be here.
And welcome to you, our audience, as well, wherever you are watching on my LinkedIn profile, on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or on live.kuble.com. You can send questions and comments, which we will then bring into our discussion here. Now, Olivia, I mentioned various perspectives on thought leadership, and there are various definitions as well. How would you define the approach?
Well, fundamentally, when I think about thought leadership, I think about the status quo versus where we should be. So that's the first thing, is where we want to go. And then why we want to go there, obviously. Seems obvious, but... And then how the thought leader is leading the way there, their vision for how to get there. So that's it, fundamentally. Then for my own approach, since I kind of started thought leadership, number one, thinking it was quite a pompous moniker for your activity of thought leadership. Yeah. And I think more about it as being thought-provoking, yes. Getting people to think, and hopefully think and reason through something with you. But also, when I started, I did a lot of emerging risk thought leadership for insurance, so covering the risks to humanity, to the environment, for various emerging technologies like genome sequencing. Yeah. It has benefits, it has risks. We were looking at smart cities and autonomous cars way back when, before anything had really happened, but just really speculating. So that's that forward thinking element combined with an analysis of the landscape, what it means for people, what it means for the environment, what it means for different sectors, how it's going to build out the market. And that gave me a very good grounding in getting kind of lateral thinking across yes. all of these different elements to contextualize things, thinking also about different stakeholders. So you're thinking about society. And that's what I actually always think first and foremost. What is the impact of something on society? Because everybody's a person. Yes, we're selling this and we're selling that and we're selling it to these businesses. But at the end of the day, you're trying to bring something to society that makes it better. And that's my approach. Yes,
and very much a personal approach, as you just mentioned.
Yeah.
It's about humanizing communications, marketing. Now you mentioned one industry in which you have already worked. Now you're working at ABB. Your role as a global thought leadership manager, what does it include?
Okay, well, I'm working for ABB Electrification. So ABB has 4 business units, and electrification is one. It's about 50,000 people in that company. And we're really focused on the energy transition, so bringing technologies to the power grid and also to smart buildings, and also e-mobility. So if you think about a smart city and everything being connected and everything becoming part of an energy efficient system that can get low emission, that's where I am working most of the time.
Yes.
Yeah, so I love it.
And now when you outlined your definition for thought leadership, you were talking about the why, the how, and the what. What does the why, how, and what look like now in your current, in what you're currently doing?
Well, it looks like ultimately we send technologies out there that help to get global warming under control. That's the ultimate goal. And then working back from there, if we focus on buildings getting energy efficiency in buildings, and the less energy you use, the less emissions you have, right? E-mobility, so electric mobility, getting the emissions out of transportation, which are about 20% of global emissions. You know, buildings are about 30%, 30 to 40% if you take into account construction. And doing that through clean electrification, which is also related to, this is getting very technical, to the power grid, because where we get our electricity can be dirty from fossil fuels, which is what most of it is still, or it can be clean from renewable energy. So we have technologies that go into the power grid. We have charging technology for the infrastructure for e-mobility. And then we have energy management and asset management for buildings that helps them to manage things more efficiently. And then technology to connect all of that so that you create a system.
Yeah.
A lot of digital technology now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
so traditionally it was an engineering firm, but increasingly, like everybody else, you know, we're using more digital technology, and it's actually that digital technology that's the key to helping the grid, aside from producing renewable energy. So this is turning into the sustainability platform, but aside from producing renewable energy, you know, you have to have a digital grid to manage it, because the grid itself can't do it. So now
thought leadership tries to clarify all that, or tries to generate attention, generate curiosity, or how would you define now ABB Electrification's goals with thought leadership, looking at what you just outlined?
Thought leadership seeks to position each of the technologies for ABB so that people understand what the impact is of a new technology and how it's going to help ultimately the environment. That's basically it. And then we have to think about, you know, when you bring an innovation to the market, who decides if you can bring it to the market, when you can bring it to the market, how you're going to bring it to the market, what the regulations are going to be, whether things are going to be standardized. It's a lot of dealing with policymakers and also helping customers to understand what the impacts of the technology will be.
So you don't differentiate. You mentioned the people, you mentioned policymakers. Do you, with regards to the target groups, do you already differentiate between B2B and B2C target groups, or do you say, well, to generate attention and to generate clarity about what you're doing, we don't differentiate?
B2B and B2C, I mean, I think there is a differentiation in the approach, probably, because for the B2B, there's a lot of analysis that goes into it and research, and you're presenting a message with a purpose that people can connect to, but it's not a very emotional message. It's purposeful, and it connects to people's desire to do something for the world and make their sector better and lead in their businesses, or for policymakers to do what's right for the public. But B2C, as you probably know, everybody knows, it's much more psychological and emotional. You cannot bring a white paper to a consumer group and say, read this. You have to deliver, snackable bits.
Weekend.
Yeah, exactly. Snackable bits of information that are really, not overly simplified, but maybe broken out a little bit more, so that you get a little bit more of a series to explain things. I mean, actually, when I was working at Medela, we're focused on moms, and they're not going to sit down and read a whole scientific abstract on whatever, human milk, this and that. So we're also trying to translate the benefits, when I was at Medela, of human milk, which are scientific, into just, easily understandable information for moms.
Yeah. Now there's already a question about, you just mentioned white paper content. Do you think that white papers are good thought leadership content?
Yes, as a kind of, as a reference, let's say. So actually we just did a thought leadership paper with the World Economic Forum and several other companies.
Yeah.
on the power grid. So sexy. And we're not expecting that many people are going to go and read that front to back, right? We're expecting that we addressed in the first segment people who are interested in the technology. The second segment, people interested in the business models that you need to create a market for a decarbonized electricity system. Mm-hmm. And then in the last section, the policy that you need or the governance to oversee all of that. So what we expect and what is normal for a paper like that, when you do address multiple stakeholders, is that people will read the section that's relevant to them or pick through for keywords or something like that. Yeah. So actually, you know, that's one of the things. Everything now is digital. We're not handing this paper out anywhere. We're not mailing it to people. So you think when you write it also, how can people search this document literally in a very practical way so that they can find the information that they need? And then also, if you produce a white paper, it won't go anywhere if you don't have a whole mechanism, multi-channel mechanism around it.
Distributed.
Right? Exactly. So, you know, we also did a blog, and we're doing a whole social series, kind of picking it apart and parceling it out so that people can think one by one, you know, about each of the, what we call mandates in the paper. So yeah, I do think it's great as an all-in-one, but it's kind of like a newspaper. Who reads the newspaper back to back now?
Yeah.
You don't.
Not so many readers.
Right.
Now, in this particular case, in this particular campaign, did you define KPIs as well, such as PDF or white paper downloads, time on website, each social channel provides you data? What's your approach in this regard?
We do track it, but we're not looking above all for those types of KPIs. And it's actually an interesting conversation because when you start out, you think, well, you've got to have some kind of KPI. So just set a KPI. We need 3% engagement, we need 5% engagement, we need this many comments or whatever, this many shares. We even talked to LinkedIn about this because we have quite a program going on LinkedIn. And we said, what should we be looking for? And they said, for thought leadership, what you should be looking for is conversations. And not, you know, necessarily in the comment section, but people actually coming to you and talking to you about what you've presented. And so that is what we're looking for. And I'm always waiting to hear, did somebody follow up with you? Did they ask you a question? Did they ask you to speak at another event because of this? And it does happen. So it may take some time. It may take some time. We were going to talk, I think, at some point about building up leader profiles versus putting stuff on your corporate page, right?
Yes.
It
will be one of my questions, and actually
okay.
There's right on thought leaders with their personal profiles versus what you mentioned, the corporate pages. It's one of the questions from the audience right now. How you decide who is an ABB thought leader, who has the right expertise, the right background? What's your approach in this regard?
Well, I guess it's probably two approaches. One is very high-level specialists. So head of digital, we'll be talking about AI. And another is the executives who are responsible for certain areas of the business, because they need to cover more of that multiple stakeholder approach, you know, and think about that. So it makes sense for them to talk about it as well, maybe not to the same degree of technical detail, but definitely to approach it from a market shaping perspective. So we do both of those, and I am primarily responsible for supporting executives.
Yes.
And of course, collecting a lot of information from experts in the process. But yeah.
Very good to know. Very interesting insights as well regarding the KPIs. Also, one of the comments here from the audience, it's more a qualitative approach than just tracking figures. Now, one of the thought leaders, if if you search for ABB on LinkedIn, one of the personal profiles that you will find is ABB CEO Björn Rosengren.
Yeah.
And what is his role in your thought leadership strategy?
His role in my thought leadership strategy is non-existent at the moment. So we have the group level that supports Björn.
Yeah.
And they work with him on that.
You mentioned before these different units, and electrification is just one of the units.
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't say non-existent, because we do interact with his profile and he interacts with our content.
Yeah.
And I think, in general, everyone in ABB has a slightly different focus area, but you look out for the content that's relevant and try to help amplify and drive the conversation and share. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think probably he's very much top of the funnel, creating awareness for the whole company. And what you were talking about are thought leaders below, which are much closer to a specific area of expertise, perhaps. As you described.
Yeah, I mean, Björn is really leading the whole business, and so he doesn't usually address the technologies, and that's a really good differentiator. Yes, what you just said.
I just mentioned LinkedIn, where you can find the CEO. Beyond LinkedIn, which other social channels are relevant for your approach? For example, are there thought leaders on Twitter as well, or on other channels, maybe also more regional specific channels when we look at Asia, for example?
Yeah, definitely on WeChat. Yeah, I think you have to be on WeChat if you're in Asia, or at least in China. But most people are on LinkedIn. There's a little bit of Facebook, there's a little bit of Twitter, and a couple of people have strayed onto Instagram.
Yeah.
But mostly we're playing on LinkedIn. Yeah.
And how do you currently see LinkedIn's strengths and weaknesses, or also looking back at how the platform developed? What do you observe?
I know that's actually a good question, because when I started Thought Leadership, there was almost nothing happening on LinkedIn. I mean, people were starting to use it, but you could organically drive a huge amount of traffic, which you cannot necessarily do now. So now it is flooded, and everybody's on there, and everybody's a thought leader, and it's an all-in-one place. Actually, I mean, I find it very convenient once you whittle down your feed to what you actually want to see, to grab news and updates and everything from everybody I want to track, to be honest. It's very easy. On the other hand, has it diluted the quality to a degree? In a way, yes. In a way, not, because there's so much information on there.
Yeah.
But it does make it difficult to rise above the tide.
Yeah. And of course, in the end, it's still up to the user who can decide what to follow and with whom to be connected. So it's also up to you to steer what you are seeing. There are some more questions about your the program that you are running. Are there trainings for thought leaders? That's one of the questions here. If a person is active on LinkedIn, for example, how do you get them ready?
Do we train our thought leaders? Yes, we train and mostly just support them a lot. Yeah. We work with them very, very closely. Yeah. And
so it's beyond the training, it's an ongoing...
Yes. I would say it's a very close relationship, because to support somebody for thought leadership, I mean, most executives cannot sit there and spend all their day writing things, and so you do a lot for them, but on the other hand, the leadership and the guidance comes from really their enormous expertise and their perspective. So you just kind of faithfully bring that together and help them to just send their thoughts out there and amplify their presence.
Yeah. So I guess ghostwriting is important. That's also one of the questions. How do you manage their content?
Yeah.
Are you, and another question here, are you publishing these posts together with them? Do you have a platform, a publishing tool just for thought leadership?
No. Yeah, we just post it like normal, normal users.
One more question regarding content, and now in this case regarding authenticity and credibility. How do you build authenticity, credibility? How do you make sure that although you do ghostwriting, it's still authentic and it still sounds like the thought leader has written the post himself, herself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, it goes back to that relationship, number one. Listening to people, understanding the way they think, the way they articulate themselves, why they think certain things, what is the character of that person. I really think about the rhetorical triad. So the ethos, the pathos, and the logos.
Yes.
And you know, a company like ABB is big on logos. It's all engineers. Not so big on the pathos, the way that people feel. And then on the ethos, you have two things. You've got the thought leader and the corporate voice, you know. And both of those characters have to come together and be seamless. So, yeah, I would say that that when you can master that ethos, that dual corporate personal character, then it naturally leads to the pathos. Yeah, and connecting to people. Because every one of these leaders, if they're talking about the same topic, they'll talk about it in a different way.
Yes.
And that's why they're thought leaders. A company cannot be a thought leader. A company is just a company.
It doesn't have a face, doesn't have an opinion.
Yeah.
Or maybe, carefully, it can have an opinion.
Yeah, but the people do have opinions, you know, and they believe a lot in what they're doing. So
yeah.
I just try to help them bring that across.
And you just mentioned how in the ethos area, the corporate perspective needs to come together with the thought leader perspective. Now, if we look at the LinkedIn company page versus the LinkedIn personal profiles, how do you sort of coordinate? How do they also benefit from each other's visibility, perhaps?
Yeah, well, I mean, we focus on, for thought leadership, we focus on the leaders, actually, and their profiles. And of course, we post from the, you know, the company page as well. But the company page helps to grab some people who aren't following the leaders and share that information with them.
So you highlight what the thought leaders are doing?
Yes. And maybe they migrate over to the thought leader profile eventually. They don't have to. I mean, we have a huge number of followers, and they'll like a gray square. That, you know, they're not hard to please in a way. They just like engineering stuff. Yeah.
But nevertheless, they follow you, so at least there's some interest.
No, there's a lot of interest, and so many different things you can talk about. It's endless, actually.
Now, speaking of the followers and interactions, you also mentioned regarding KPIs. It's your part of your approach is to measure conversations.
Yeah.
What types of conversations are happening on thought leader profiles? What do you observe?
It depends. Sometimes people want to know a lot about the business. And then, of course, you have engineers asking questions about the technology and saying, but what about this technology? Yeah. And I love it when they do that. You know, when they don't just accept what you've put out there, but they ask a question that challenges you. So I think those are probably the most exciting comments, but that are public. But then the behind-the-scenes comments might be the ones we're really trying to get, because those are the ones where somebody follows up and says, I would really like to hear more about this.
Person who is even one step further in the conversion funnel.
Yeah.
Are there sometimes perhaps competitors asking these very specific questions? Do you need to be careful how to answer?
I have not seen that publicly yet. They might be asking behind the scenes. And I mean, to be honest, people move from one company to the next. So they're networked, actually.
Do you observe differences? I guess you have thought leaders in various markets and countries, so a global perspective on this as well. Do you observe cultural differences?
I don't have a visibility of that, actually, I would say. I would say that sometimes, they will take global content. And what I would love to do is get the process going in the reverse, where we take something from a country and think how we can use that, because it'll definitely bring something new to the whole process. But they sometimes take the global content and then think, how does this apply to our market?
Yes.
As it often does, because it is global.
Yeah. And
then, to be honest, if it's in another language and I'm not seeing it, we're not tracking that far out.
Yeah.
It would be good to do.
Yeah, maybe an interesting
getting there
type of analysis.
Yeah. Well, this is a new role, by the way, this year. So.
Yeah, and you need plans for the future, I guess. There's one more question regarding whether thought leadership. Now, the program you're running, is it rather PR or marketing?
I would say it's more PR, and maybe even getting into public affairs than marketing. But I do think of thought leadership as a spectrum, or something going all the way down the funnel.
This differentiation doesn't make sense anymore.
I mean, it kind of does, because it depends on the channel and your audience. If you're talking to engineers and you're selling them something, and you want to give them some context, at the end of the day, you still present the product to them, for example. But if you're doing a white paper at the World Economic Forum, you're not presenting the product,
Yeah.
So it depends on where you are in the funnel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then there's one more question regarding how much effort goes into such a program. So this person says, I made the experience that it's sometimes difficult to find backup in the management for such a program. Was it in your case?
That's a good question. Usually there are people who just find it intriguing and want to jump in, and yes, there are managers who are reticent to commit to the long-term work. Yeah. But I have to say that at the end of the day, most of the time when they get into it, they realize it's very rewarding to think through that whole process, to be able to articulate themselves immediately on something that really is important for them and for the business. So yeah, it usually takes a few months to work with a new thought leader and get them kind of comfortable with the whole approach and the collaboration and the outcome.
And in this process, are there some people who realize, well, it's not for me what we're doing here? Or do you generally observe, as you just mentioned, once people see the program running, they see the value? I
think insofar as it's a thought leader in a corporate sense is a corporate spokesperson, you have to be ready to be a corporate spokesperson. So if you don't want to do that, you're not going to enjoy the thought leadership, probably. Yeah.
Do you see risks? You mentioned that people are moving around between companies. When I asked about competitors, do you see a certain risk that if you build too many very successful thought leaders, they get hired from your competitors?
No, I don't. I mean, in the last few years, collaboration has become so important. And I mean, if you look at the pandemic, you could not have this kind of warring system of capitalism that you had, and you had to just do stuff together. Yeah. And I really think that global warming is the same thing, and people have actually awakened to that fact. So there is a new attitude of collaboration, even though, of course, companies are still competing.
Yes.
But I don't think you should be afraid of thought leadership. Actually, the question that you asked could also be applied to kind of building out thought leadership in general and giving information away for free to the public, which I've heard before.
Yes.
Why should we do that? Then we just give away the whole strategy to everybody. But actually, there's enough. It's not a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
There's enough going on that we just need to drive progress.
Yeah.
And if you're sending out quality, if you have something to give to the world, you will have room.
Yes,
that's my approach.
There's the famous Clue Train Manifesto quote, markets are conversations. So in the end, if you're in a conversation, you are also in the market and you have the visibility you need. There's one more question. You mentioned how you are supporting thought leaders, and one person is asking here, how many thought leaders are you supporting, maybe with regards to the workload?
With regard to the workload. I'm supporting several, yeah.
Okay, yeah. You also outlined how you need to find different perspectives, different tones of voices, so that's perhaps challenging sometimes. And there's one more question regarding how we position thought leaders. So a person here is asking, is a thought leader, is he or she an influencer for ABB? Would you use this term as well?
Yeah. I mean, you sometimes call people key opinion leaders, thought leader. Maybe thought leader is more of a B2B type of term, but
yes.
Yeah.
And in general, would you say thought leadership, coming back to the B2B, B2C differentiation, would you say thought leadership works much better for B2B, or is it an approach that works similarly well for B2C audiences? I actually asked on my LinkedIn profile, I did a poll asking this question, and I think the clear majority was saying, well, thought leadership is much more established in B2B. It's the much better environment for this approach. What do you think?
Well, I will say this. When I worked at Medela, of course I was doing scientific symposium, so that's a little bit different in the scientific PR, but there is a place for thought leadership in B2C, but it's not as densely analytical as it is. It's more like the storytelling aspect and helping people to, again, see that vision of the future and the difference between now and what should be. But it's just a little more spacious.
Yes. Yes, and of course different types of decision making, different funnel if you look at B2C products and services. You just mentioned the future.
Yeah.
How do you see the future of thought leadership? Which trends are coming up, or which, I mentioned future plans regarding analysis and other experiments that you might want to do in the future? Any plans and ideas?
I always have plans and ideas, but I'm not going to give away the plans and ideas. I mean, I like to number one, just always stretch. Every time I do something, I try to stretch a little bit more and help the thought leaders stretch a little bit more. But for the development of thought leadership, at least in B2B, let's say, but maybe in general, actually, I think what's interesting is that during the pandemic, do you follow the Edelman Trust Barometer?
Yes, I'm always reading it, and of course, one of the top or one of the key results, I think, was how where people trust and whom people trust, of course.
Yeah. Yes, and because of the infodemic, they call it, during the pandemic, people lost a lot of trust in the governments and even in journalism. And as a result, they're looking to business leaders more for their competence and for their ethics.
Yes.
And I was thinking, why is that? I mean, nothing's changed. Business leaders are business leaders. Maybe more collaborative now because of all of this, and definitely putting sustainability at the core, but somehow they have become more trustworthy. And I think it's because, when you go out as a thought leader, as a business leader, you have to go out with a well thought out solution, or you have nothing to bring. Journalists tell you what's happening, but business thought leaders tell you what should be happening. And I think that that is something people are looking for now, is that vision of the future from people who have the competence to describe it.
And from people who have skin in the game, something to lose. I think journalists and politicians, they can just talk, don't have so much to lose. But if you're running a business, it's much more different environment. Now, if someone who was watching this live stream would like to know what you know, would like to use the same sources for information and inspiration, can you give some recommendations, podcasts you're listening, people you follow on Twitter, or no, Twitter you're not using anymore, but on LinkedIn perhaps, or books you're reading?
To be honest, I follow multilateral organizations. They're like the OECD.
Yes.
That puts out just a huge amount of knowledge across every sector. The World Economic Forum, that is bringing together business and policymakers a lot. News, of course, competitors, a lot of governments. These are the things that I keep track of, because they're the things that feed the whole vision of the future, actually, and help you to understand the direction that we are going or should be going. Yes. So I don't spend a huge amount of time thinking about or listening to or watching or reading how to do thought leadership, because I think it just comes when you focus on what you actually want to do and say.
Yes. So as you mentioned initially, it's not thought leadership, but thought provocation, or that's the type of trigger you're looking for. Many thanks for these insights. I think we learned at least three things today. You mentioned initially the focus on qualitative KPIs. You nicely outlined the ethos, pathos approach that you're following. And now I think your last point is very insightful as well, to look beyond thought leadership, to find inspirational and informational sources that actually make you think beyond what you're doing, think into the future. Many thanks, Olivia.
It was my pleasure. Thank you very much, Christoph.
Many thanks to our audience as well for your questions and comments. As always, this Thought Leadership live stream continues. Follow us, Kuble, on social media, wherever you can follow us for more information about the next sessions. For now, many thanks, and see you soon.